Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome into the latest edition of the Ancient Andes podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Wolf, coming to you live and direct from Fort Collins, Colorado. It's a beautiful October fall day here, and I am in shock. I just got to interview one of my idols, one of my heroes, we'll call him what you will, the man, the myth, the legend, Brien Foerster from Ancient Aliens on the History Channel. Brien has done extensive work all throughout the world on ancient megalithic sites, but one of his biggest fascinations on this planet has been Puma Punku and Tiwanaku in the Altiplano of Bolivia. Here we find an ancient megalithic site that seems to have been destroyed by a cataclysm at some point. We have no idea what the purpose of this site was. We think of it as a temple complex or a spiritual center, but it also shares unique qualities that can't be found anywhere else on the planet. It's truly a mystery, and I was so humbled to be able to interview Brien and get his expertise and knowledge and firsthand experience on this site. And you're going to hear me interview him in just a second. I was extremely nervous, so I apologize if it sounds rushed or if I don't sound comfortable. I wasn't. I was extremely uncomfortable, but it's amazing how things can happen if you just set your mind to them, and you put that energy out towards the universe. I really do believe great things can happen, and this podcast is hopefully evidence of that for you. I just want to do a little house cleaning. So when I was talking to him about Arthur Poznansky, I asked him about the dating in correlation to astrological signs, and what I meant to say was astronomical signs, and more celestial objects themselves. So you're going to hear me mess that up. Other than that, I think I did okay. Other than saying I'm working on that, guys. Come on, cut me some slack here, okay? And I also want to let you guys know you can support this podcast. I don't have any advertisements or anything like that. There's nobody else running the ship except for me. So feel free to click on that support button on Spotify, and you can make a donation if you want. By no means are you obliged to do that, but it's something cool that will help to keep this podcast going and provide future episodes. So I hope you guys enjoy the podcast, and thank you for listening. Brien, thank you so much for being here with us. We are about to discuss Tiwanaku and Puma Punku, a place that you are extremely familiar with. I heard about these sites because of you. Could you please tell us when your first time you heard about these sites were and when your first trip there was?
Well, I've probably heard about that location probably 40 years ago when I was a kid, and I saw it on different TV channels, like US TV channels, and just it's one of those places that fascinated me. The first time I was there, I would say it was about 15 years ago, and I've been there about 60 times since then.
Incredible. And what did you walk away with your first time that you were there? Did you know that you were going to be coming back time and time again, or was that something that's kind of developed over the years? It's been gnawing at you.
Well, it's one of the most mysterious sites on the planet, and it's unlike any other site I've ever been to, no matter what country you want to name. So the main thing that I got away from the first trip was it was very clear that the so-called Tiwanaku civilization were not responsible for its construction. They obviously occupied the site, but somebody with incredible advanced technology was clearly there before, and built both Tiwanaku and Puma Punku, which are the same location, just separated by fencing. But that's, I was just mystified by who could have possibly done this and why the authorities keep insisting that it was a relatively primitive culture that did this very advanced engineering work.
Absolutely. And we see this engineering work all throughout the Andes. It's more unique and spectacular at Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, but for example, Nyaupa Waka or Nyaupa Iglesia, a place that I learned because of you and your videos, so thank you. You also see that incredible architecture that no one even today can explain how they did it or what tools were used or even show you those tools.
That's correct.
All right, thank you, Brien. Well, let's go ahead and continue. So I've read a little bit about Arthur Poznansky and his theories about the astrological alignments. Do you share those kind of same theories with him? And how old do you think these sites could be? And do you think Pumapunku is older than Tiwanaku?
Well, I think Tiwanaku and Puma Punku are contemporary with one another, but
Okay.
the site of Tiwanaku was occupied by the Tiwanaku culture, whereas Puma Punku appears to have been buried in mud. So Arthur Poznansky was the first serious archaeologist to work at the site. He spent almost 50 years there, which was quite incredible. And he did discover that the alignments, I think of the I think of the Kalasasaya area, indicated that it was between 15,000 and 17,000 years ago. And I'm not sure if he was exactly correct, but I do know that the sites are likely more than 13,000 years old. So he's likely in the ballpark, and his measurements were much more precise than mine.
Okay, fantastic. Next thing I want to ask you about, Brien, is the transportation techniques that people want us to believe happened, which was that they were transported on the reed boats that came from a quarry 90 kilometers, if I'm not mistaken, across Lake Titicaca. And that was the sand, was that the andesite or the sandstone?
That's the andesite. It's from a quarry on top of a volcano to the northeast. And then the sandstone came from a quarry about 8 miles away, or 13 kilometers to the west, over mountainous terrain.
Right.
So,
and no
yeah,
rollers, like we said, no rollers here, no trees of any kind are growing at this height. So they weren't using those. And the thought that you could put these on reed boats and float them is just, I'm not even going to address that.
no, that's a very good point. That still is the conventional answer, that the native people built giant reed boats to transport, 10-ton, 20-ton, 30-ton stones, where the sandstone is up to over 100 tons. And
Exactly.
that, somehow they were transported over mountain ranges, as you said, without indigenous trees existing there to use as rollers. So it's, at this point, it's quite comical that they still stick to their story.
Yes, it absolutely is. And Brien, I have to say, I saw a UNESCO photo, an aerial shot that showed the extent of the full site. And they say that it's 3 times larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. And I know when you go there that the site seems fairly small, and the city of Tiwanaku is built kind of right on top of it or right next to it. Do you think they will do future excavations? Do you think there is a lot more that could be discovered here?
Well, it is important that they did do ground penetrating radar a couple of years ago, I think it was, and they discovered massive chambers underneath Pumapunku, and that the size is at least 3 or 4 or more times of what you can visually see today. So clearly there's a lot more underground. Also, my friend Antonio Portugal did ground penetrating radar, I think about 1998, and his team as well found that there were very large chambers underground that seem very solid, but the government has refused to allow any more excavations of any kind. And I think, again, that's political. They don't want to admit that their history goes back much farther than what they want to admit.
Of course. And I know that there is talk, I mean, that they had possibly smelted metals at this altitude in order to make these metal clamps that you see in place. What do you think was the purpose of this site in its original state?
I think it performed some kind of energetic function, similar to what the Great Pyramid was. What's kind of important, like what you said, whoever did this work was able to smelt bronze at an altitude of almost 13,000 feet above sea level. And that, a so-called primitive culture wouldn't be capable of doing that. There is a lot of copper and gold and silver and tin in the area. So it does look like it was a very pragmatic, functional industrial site prior to being adopted as a religious site. So it has all the hallmarks of being an ancient facility for processing ores. And yeah, that's still, you know, after 60 trips, that's still my feeling of what its original function was.
And to continue with that same thought, Brien, can you talk a little bit about the magnetic qualities that you yourself have discovered with the H blocks?
Yeah, I think it was actually Giorgio Tsoukalos of Ancient Aliens who first was able to figure out that the andesite was very highly magnetic, whereas the sandstone isn't. So ever since I saw his episode of that, every trip I've gone there with magnetometers and compasses and things. There's no regular pattern in terms of the magnetism, but some of the stones are incredibly magnetic. They'll cause a compass to go off by at least 270 degrees off of what it should be registering, because of course, first you measure the normal magnetic field of the area, which is east to west. And then especially at the H blocks, if you inject a compass into the slot at the top part of the H block, it'll go at least 270 degrees off, and then you pull the compass back and it returns to normal. And other stones are even more erratic acting when you present a magnetometer or Tesla meter to it.
Oh, that's fascinating. I would love to get there myself and do the site. I feel bad. I lived in Cusco for almost 3 years and never made it to Puma Punku or Tiwanaku. So next trip, I'm definitely doing Bolivia, and I would love to do that with you. Do you still offer tours?
Sure.
Okay, great. Because I saw on Hidden Inca Tours, do you also offer private tours and also group tours? So that's also something that our listeners will be interested in, I'm sure. Okay, Brien, just a couple more questions here before we finish up. There's a couple of sites in the region that seem to have significance with Tiwanaku and Puma Punku, as is to be expected for a site of such magnitude. Excuse my pronunciation, Kenani? This is the Inca kind of stadium or quote unquote Inca stadium that kind of rests on the shores and I believe points in the same direction. Do you believe there's any similarities to that culture and the one that formed Tiwanaku?
Yeah, that's a site that I've only been to, I think I only discovered it in person, I think 4 years ago.
Okay.
And it seems to be facing Puma Punku and Tiwanaku.
Okay.
It's just over the border in Peru itself. It does look like a stadium, but a stadium facing the ocean is or the lake is kind of a weird thing. But it's a site that very few tourists go to. There's like one sign that points to it. The local authorities don't care who goes there. You can fly quadcopters there. It's not necessarily even registered into the national system of ancient sites in Peru. So it's a very, very curious location and well worth visiting if you're anywhere near the Lake Titicaca area.
And there's also Santiago de Ojo, did I pronounce that correct? Where there seems to be possible vitrification nearby Tiwanaku, and it's also facing towards the site, is that correct?
Yeah, it's Santiago de Oje.
Okay.
It's barely across the Bolivian border, and it's it's referred to as a snake temple because there is a figure of a coiled up snake there. It's clearly a megalithic site because the perimeter is made of very large sandstone blocks, and there does appear to be evidence not of human destruction, but some kind of massive possible heat flash that hit that location as well as many others in the area. So it's another place that, again, most tourists don't visit, but is well worth it if you're in that general area.
Awesome, Brien. Well, I want to thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to be with us. And can you tell us about your current works and